Higgsfield came out with a new tool. Well, actually, it's a revamp of an older tool called Cinema Studio 2.0. I want to walk through specifically the new 3D scene function, which I think is pretty cool. But what I want to explain is the mechanism behind it, which I think works a little bit differently than most people think it does. I'm also going to discuss why I think it fails sometimes and succeeds other times, and what you can do to fix a failed 3D scene output and really get the most out of this tool. So first of all, Cinema Studio is a really cool tool that allows people to make cinematic images using different lens and camera presets, including focal length, aperture, and all of these different cool options. It isn't perfect, but I think that it's one of the best tools out there right now to create cinematic visuals. Now, just to walk through what this new 3D tool does, you create a base 2D image using the settings in Cinema Studio. Then all you have to do is press this button, generate 3D scene, and then it'll generate a Gaussian splat of your scene. So here you can see that image that I just showed you. It's now in a 3D space. Using these functions, pan, zoom, move, speed up, down, roll, lens, and aspect ratio, here you can choose your focal length. Using the keyboard keys, you can move in, you can move out, you can move to the side. You click your mouse to tilt the camera, and you can even move and tilt at the same time, which is really cool. The idea here is that you can move your camera around this space, take a snapshot, and then it will render out a new image, high quality, from that angle. This gives us control over the camera like we never have had before. Here you can see it's taking our snapshots that we took from inside of the 3D world it created using the Gaussian splat, and it's generating something with a high level of detail. So I want to show you some successful renders first, because this tool, I think, has a lot of potential when it works. This is the Gaussian splat snapshot, and this is the render. Based on this original image, in the 3D world, I also made this snapshot of the tabletop, and then this was the render, which I thought was pretty good. Here's the Gaussian splat snapshot, and then here is the final render. Of course, like any tool, there are some drawbacks. This is the original, this is a snapshot, and then this is the output. The likeness just isn't quite there. The little elements that make his face unique here, like his freckles, is just slightly different, more generalized. This is one of the renders from the snapshots we took earlier. So this is the snapshot, obviously very distorted, and the image that I outputted, it shows that it's a close-up of her face, but the angle is completely different and the anatomy is a little bit wonky. But you can see in the background that the background ambiance and color scheme and everything matches what we have in our original reference image. Going down here, this was a slightly higher angle view of the two characters looking off screen. And then this is what we got. So as I was doing these experiments, I kept wondering, why does it do some renders so well, so accurately, and then it gets others just so very wrong? As you can see here, the scientists turned into chairs. So why does this happen? I don't have insider knowledge, but based on my experience prompting and my experience using different techniques, what I think it's doing behind the scenes is not taking the camera data and the object location data to reconstruct the space in a new image, but instead, I think it's only using the snapshot as a general guide while referencing the original 2D image to create the new image through a mechanism called sketch-guided generation. So these snapshots that it allows you to take when you're in the 3D space are functioning as sketches that create a framework for the image, and along with referencing the original 2D image, allows the AI to fill in the blanks, add the fidelity, keep the characters consistent in a new composition and framing, just like it does with a sketch-guided generation, which is a technique that I have made an entire super long, super in-depth video about, but I just haven't finished editing it, so I haven't uploaded it yet. Sketch-guided generation is something I'm extremely familiar with. I use it all the time in my workflow, and it's a technique that allows me to get the perfect generation on the first try most of the time. So I think when people think of sketch guided generation or sketch to image generation or whatever you want to call it, they associate it with sketches that just turn into the final image. But in reality, the greatest benefit of using sketch guided generation is being able to add additional reference images to maintain likeness, character designs, environments across the board. So here you can see there's a sketch that I've added as the first reference image, and I've added a reference image of the characters in the environment as the second reference image. And then in the prompt, I indicate what each image is for. Same thing in this example. The first reference image is this sketch. The second is this character. The third is this other character with her prop. And then the fourth is a reference of the environment. And put them all together and explain everything in the prompt, and you end up with this image iterated on the first try. Same thing with this image, which would typically be a little bit tricky to iterate if you were just using text alone. This was the sketch. This is the character reference. This is the environment reference. And then this is the truck reference. And then altogether, you get this image. But when it comes to this 3D tool, I don't think that it's inputting several different reference images in addition to the snapshot. I think it's just taking the original reference image that the 3D scene is based on and using that as the sole reference for the textures, environment, characters, and everything else. To get even more specific and demonstrate exactly what I think is happening in the 3D tool, on the right side here, I've created a scene, and on the left here, I've used a sketch as input 1, and I've used this image of the entire scene as input 2, and this is the output. You can see that the output closely resembles my sketch here and stayed true to the character designs and environment. So I think that's what the 3D tool is doing. It's using the snapshot as the sketch, and then somewhere in the background, it's using the original image that the 3D space was created from as a reference for everything else. You would think that the AI would get really confused when referencing an image that has so much information, but it doesn't. And sketch guided generation is not only something that works with more detailed images. As you can see here, this sketch by my coworker turned into this image. My coworker sketched this, and then this was the output. My coworker sketched this very quickly, and then this was the output, which is quite similar to the sketch, and the prompt was very short. So that would explain how we go from this snapshot to this output, despite the snapshot being incredibly simple and a bit abstract. Here in Photoshop, if we increase the contrast and turn this image black and white, we can start to see how the AI might view this image. One line is here, one line is here, and then we have this large mass here. That's just enough information to create the wings of the pterodactyl and this treetop here. If we turn color back on and zoom in, we can see that the greens of this snapshot are very similar to the greens of the treetop. Color helps the AI to identify what certain objects are meant to be. In sketch guided generation, color can be used to give direction to the AI. In addition to indicating the color of certain objects in frame, color can be used as an anchor point to tie objects and textures in a reference image to the sketch itself. Another way that we can find out how much or how little the AI understands about what it's seeing when it comes to these snapshots is coming into Whisk. I haven't seen anybody talking about Whisk, at least not for a while. I think it's an amazing tool, and it helps me to make better prompts like all the time. Here I've uploaded a few of the different snapshots. And if you click on this little icon, it gives you an AI text interpretation of what we're looking at. And so if you look at this one that we analyzed earlier, it acknowledges that it's abstract. It doesn't know exactly what it is, but the guess that it's a winged creature is accurate enough that adding the reference image of the pterodactyl makes everything fall into place. It also understands that the blurred masses of deep green and brown indicate foliage. So knowing that the AI understands this much, we can then understand how it was able to render the image of the pterodactyl so accurately. Compared to something like this, it starts off by describing it as abstract, but it calls out the central figure as possibly being a dinosaur, which aligns with what we ended up seeing in the final rendered image. And even though it describes everything as masses, pointillism, and vague areas, obviously all of those aspects were ignored in the final render and replaced with the information that came from the original reference image. So we can infer that anything that the AI believes is abstract, glitches, pointillism, or other things that are not objects, gets replaced by elements of the original reference image. That's basically the AI saying that it doesn't have any idea what's actually going on. And so then the original reference image comes in to save the day by filling in the blanks. Here's this one as well. You can see that it understands that it's a person, that's an adult. And notably, through the description of what the person is wearing, there is no mention of a backpack. And the backpack was obviously missing when this image was rendered. And then here's one of the sketches that my coworker made. And if we go down here, you can see that despite how simplified the sketch is, the AI gets a lot right. It understands that this is some sort of an overhead view. It understands that the central shape is a road. It understands that these objects could be a building or buildings. And it even understands that these three sketches are animals with 4 legs. Even though, interestingly enough, the sketch only indicates 2 legs, maybe 3 legs if you think the tail is a leg, but the AI understands that they are 4-legged, which I think is really, really fascinating. It even guesses correctly that they are cows, even though to a human eye, this sketch might seem simplified, and people might assume that it would be hard for the AI to figure this out. It clearly knows what it's looking at. So now I'm going to show you some sketch-guided generations that I created using this same scene. I sketched this, which is basically changing the position of the characters a little bit and having trees on either side framing the image. And this was the output. In my prompt, I also included the original image as a reference image, which allows the AI to pull texture, colors, environment context, character designs, and apply them to your sketch. You can see I did a really, really simple sketched image of the alien creature coming out from behind a tree. And then this was the output. This is my sketch of a French over, and this is what it gave me. If we go back to this image, which used this Gaussian Splat snapshot as a reference, it doesn't show that it's using the original image as a reference as well, but we can infer that based on how detailed and how consistent these characters are with the originals. Here's another iteration of that. In this image, my prompt was very, very simple here. I just told it to use this sketch as a reference for the composition and framing, and then I told it to reference the original image for texture, environment, etc. And this is probably the biggest question I have about how this 3D scene tool works, which is, what is the prompt behind the scenes? Because while you can sometimes get a successful output using a really simple prompt like this, it can really go off the rails if you're not specific enough, which is why this guy suddenly has an accordion when using the simplified version of the prompt using this sketch. But then this very same sketch works perfectly to create this image when a more descriptive prompt is applied. Sketch-guided generation tends to work best with simple, specific prompts like this, which describe what objects are located where, and this level of detail removes ambiguity and reduces misinterpretation by the AI, which allows you to get that one-shot image that we always strive for in Gen AI. I get into a lot more detail about this in my other video, but for now, here are some simple directional keywords and key phrases that I use in my prompts when using this technique. Feel free to screenshot. So if your first 3D scene image output was not that great, but you still really like the angle or the framing and want to try again, you can recreate the image using a sketch-guided generation prompt style and get the output you were aiming for. At the bottom right of the 3D scene output display, you can click Recreate here, and then it brings you into the video section for some reason, but you can click on Image, and then it's already added the Gaussian Splat snapshot as reference image 1. And then I've added as a second image the original reference image. Now in my prompt, I'm directing it clearly to use image 1 as a reference for framing and composition. I'm telling it what to use image 2 for, and then I'm going to very simply describe the shot that I want. I usually do a batch size of 1, and since this is just a test, I'm keeping it 1K. Let's actually do aperture f4 And since this is supposed to be telephoto, it's not a 50, but 50 is the closest to telephoto we have as an option here. And now let's see what it does. Okay, so now we've got this. It has recreated it pretty faithfully with quite a lot of detail that makes this image actually usable now, because we had the liberty of being specific in our prompt and telling it exactly what we wanted to see. I was able to add this detail about the double helix being on screen, whereas before it just would have given us a generic readout on these monitors. With more detail, we can add more storytelling elements. So obviously this is much better than this output, which is what the 3D tool gave me originally. This used the same Gaussian Splat snapshot, but this was the output, and it clearly did not really understand what was going on. If we go back to our chair example, I'll hit recreate, I'll hit image. I've added back our reference image, and what we're really seeing is kind of this area here. It's useful to describe what's on the top of frame and what's on the bottom of frame so that it knows where to crop. So you can see that this is quite a lot more accurate compared to this. You could even say that this is more cinematic because it seems to have more accurately lifted the color grade and texture and everything from this shot, which is something that I directed it to do in the prompt. Whereas something about the 3D scene tool seems to opt for a more low contrast, super high fidelity, almost commercial look. And we lose some of the cinematic qualities that we would like to retain from the original cinematic Cinema Studio image. I've used the same snapshot. I've used the same original 2D reference image. The only difference is that I got a lot more specific with the prompt. And as you can see, it's not even that complicated of a prompt. I'm just telling it what it's supposed to be depicting in a very direct way, basically reinforcing the original Gaussian Splat snapshot. I think that this tool can be super useful, especially for AI creators who have never experienced being on set or setting up a camera in real life. Exploring a scene through this 3D space can give you a taste of what it's like on an actual set and help you think more like a filmmaker and think more creatively about your shots. And if the tool doesn't give you what you want, then you can always just recreate it, throw your own prompt in there, and get something closer to what you wanted.